Good evening and welcome everyone to the County of Brant 2022 Municipal and School Board Elections Candidate Information Night. Thank you very much for everybody taking the time to come out here and attend. My name is Alicia Dijak and I am the County Clerk for the County of Brant. And we are very happy that so many people have decided to join us to find out about more information for what it entails being a candidate for the municipal school board elections. So very quickly, just going through what we hope to accomplish tonight in a very short period of time. Right now we're doing welcomes, introductions, and some housekeeping just so that people can understand what it is that they're hoping to learn tonight, where to get more information, how to ask questions, and additional information that you might have. So first up will be myself and Nancy Davis and Briar Allison from the County of Brant Clerks Department. They are both deputy clerks with the County of Brant. We are just going to be providing a high-level overview of the nomination process specific to the County of Brant and also the intended election process. We are then going to be turning it over to Caitlin Reddick and Carolyn Sove. We're very lucky to have two municipal advisors from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing Ministry, and they are going to be discussing with us running for council, third-party advertisers, and also campaign finances. And finally, we are very lucky to have Councillor Mark Laferriere, who is currently a sitting councillor with the County of Brant. He is going to be discussing his experience as a councillor and what people can expect moving forward. So just to get started, some general, very high level information dates that everybody paying attention should be aware of. Our nominations open May the 2nd at 8:30 a.m. So that would be when the period would open, when people are able to file the required documents that are required to be a candidate. You're going to be getting more information about that later on as to when, where, and how to do that. Also, nominations close August the 19th at 2:00 p.m. That is nomination day. After 2:00 p.m., no more candidates will be accepted and all of the fields will be closed. Some new things, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, online advanced voting this year. We do have advanced voting online for the County of Brant from October 10th until the 23rd. Following that, there will be one in-person advanced voting date on Monday, October 17th. And then finally, and most importantly, election day is Monday, October 24th. So just so that those watching can be aware, the structure for the County of Brant is comprised of 11 members. So one member is the mayor, who is elected at large, which means that anybody in any ward can vote on the position of mayor. And then we have 5 different wards which elect 2 councillors each. This is an image of what our ward boundaries currently look like, with Ward 1 to the north, Ward 2 and 3 comprising of Paris, Ward 4 off to the west, and then Ward 5 down at the bottom there. So the term of office for council is the same as it always is. It is 4-year term. This year, the term starts a little bit earlier. It starts November 15th, and then it would run until when the next council would be elected, which would be in 2026. The rate of pay, which we have right there for the County of Brant councillors and the mayor, is listed at the bottom. That was received information from our Treasury Department. And there are also additional benefits in addition to wages, such as benefits, mileage, conference, and a training allowance. So in addition to councillors in the mayor position, we also run the election for the school boards. We will be including 2 different races on the ballot this year. One will be the Grand Erie District School Board. So this election includes 2 trustees who are elected from a combination of the County of Brant and from wards 3 and 7 from neighboring Norfolk. The Brant Haldimand Norfolk Catholic District School Board, which is the separate school board, has 1 candidate to be elected. There are 2 French school boards which the County of Brant is not responsible for running the election for. So we will not be accepting nominations for those positions. However, if anybody would like to submit nominations for those positions, I would ask that you just reach out and contact us, and we would be happy to help you. So going through briefly what has changed since 2018, the legislation has largely remained the same, but there are some changes that have occurred. Firstly, the term of council now starts on November 15th. In the past, this started later in December. Nomination period runs from May the 2nd to August 19th, although the dates in terms of times in the year, so the first day after May the 1st, that hasn't changed. However, just because May the 1st falls on a Sunday this year, the first day that nomination will open is May the 2nd. The clerk's department is now located at the Paris Customer Service Office. Traditionally, if people have filed nomination papers in the past, they know that the nominations have always been filed at the clerk's department in Burford. We are now located in Paris. As I said before, we do have online advanced voting for October the 10th to the 23rd, and we do have only one online advanced in-person voting date of October the 17th. So I am going to turn it over to one of the deputies, Nancy, to carry on.
Thank you. So nominations will open on Monday, May 2nd, 2022. They're going to be accepted, as Alicia said, at the Brandon County Brant Clerk's Office, 66 Grand River Street North in Paris during normal business hours, and they'll be accepted until 2 o'clock on Friday, August 19th. We do ask that you make an appointment to submit your nominations. The documents required to be filled out are available online, or you can contact the County of Brant Customer Service offices. The documents to be filed include the nomination form, Form 1, Declaration of Qualifications, the endorsement form, Form 2, and the Freedom of Information Release Form, Nomination and Declaration. The forms to be signed in front of a Commissioner of Oath. The fees must be submitted upon filing as well, which are $200 for the head of council and $100 for any other office. The fees are payable by a cash, debit, money order, or certified check that's payable to the County of Brant. If any withdrawal of nominations or a change to the office of nomination form must be submitted in writing to the clerk's office by 2 p.m. on the nomination day, which is August 19th, 2022. You need to keep in mind that all the documents filed with your nomination form are public information, and the information that's not posted on the website is available for inspection at the clerk's office. Nominations are to be certified by 4 p.m. on Monday, August 22nd, 2022, and the clerk will determine the offices that have acclamations, elections, or if a supplemental nomination period is required. As Alicia said, we do have advanced polls that we held October 17th for in-person polling. Election day is October 24th. The declaration of results and/or recount will be held if necessary. And the 2022-2026 term of council begins on November 15th, 2022, and the inaugural meeting will be held then as well. The campaign period ends January 3rd, 2023. All campaign financial statements must be filed by the deadline, which is March 31st, 2023 by 2 p.m. Your filing fees will be returned when your financial statements are submitted prior to the deadline. For campaign materials, the County of Brant sign bylaw allows for signs on road allowances under certain conditions, and we ask that you please review the bylaw carefully. Signs are not permitted on any municipal property, voting place, on or in front of any property without the permission of the property owner. All signs must be removed within the 48 hours of the election. And if you have any questions or concerns, they should be directed to our bylaw enforcement team at the numbers provided there. And just as a reminder, no campaign costs, events, or materials or displays can be made until after the candidate has filed the nomination papers. So municipal use of resources. To follow the provision of the Municipal Elections Act 1996, the County of Brant procedures regarding the municipal use of resources must be followed by all election candidates, including County Brant Council and staff during the campaign period. The procedure outlines corporate use of resources, assets, funding shall not be used for any campaign-related purposes. This includes things like county facilities or properties, equipment, supplies, technologies like cell phones, voicemail, computers, emails, photos, trademarks, brandings, contact listings, and staff time. The municipal resource procedure outlines expectations of County Brant staff from the period of May 1st to election day. Staff are expected to behave in an impartial, fair, and unbiased manner. They're to avoid any real or perceived conflict of interest, and they're discouraged from assisting with municipal elections campaigns. However, they're not to identify as county staff or use county resources while engaging in the campaign activities if they choose to do so. If staff are hosting a public meeting of any kind, all municipal council members and candidates who've submitted nomination forms will be present at the meeting will be introduced, and candidates are asked to advise the host of their presence to make sure that we recognize them. The County of Brant website will be updated to remove the council biographies during the campaign period, and each candidate will be permitted one photo, their name, a contact information, and one link on approval by the clerk. Public information, election information will be available through the local media and on the County Brant website. The names of candidate and contact information will be posted as soon as we possibly can following the receipt of your nomination fees and paperwork. The sign bylaw, all candidates are required to abide by the sign bylaw in terms of campaign signage and placement. And I'll turn next over to Briar.
Okay, so next we'll be covering the qualifications for candidates and electors of municipal office. Candidates and electors must be 18 years of age or older, a Canadian citizen, and a resident, owner or tenant of land in the County of Brant, or the spouse of an owner or tenant. Further, in order for candidates and electors to qualify for the municipal election, they must not be legally prohibited from voting under any law, and they cannot be disqualified by legislation, which I'll expand upon in the next slide. So those that are not eligible to run for municipal office would be any person who is not eligible to vote in the municipality, so they don't meet the qualifications that I just went over in the last slide. An employee of the municipality is also not eligible to run unless a leave of absence is taken. And further, a judge of any court, a member of the Ontario Legislature, Senate, or House of Commons are all not eligible to run for office. And lastly, a candidate previously disqualified to run in any municipality in Ontario, meaning they did not file their financial statements from the last election, would disqualify you from running in the next election. Next slide, please. So similarly, we'll be covering the qualifications for candidates and electors of school board trustees. So candidates and electors must be 18 years of age or older, a Canadian citizen, and eligible to vote for that school board. For the separate school board, electors and candidates must be Roman Catholic and pay separate board taxes. Paying the separate school board taxes does not in itself entitle an elector to vote for separate school board trustee. And for the French school boards, candidates and electors must hold French language rights. And finally, they must not be legally prohibited from voting and not disqualified by legislation. Next slide, please. Okay, so who is not eligible to run for school board trustee? Any person not eligible to vote for the school board, so again, they don't meet the qualifications in the last slide, an employee of the school board, municipal officials, judges of any court, a member of the Ontario Legislature, Senate, or House of Commons, and a candidate from the previous election disqualified to run. Again, they did not file their financial statements. Next slide, please. Okay, so next I'm going to share some information regarding the voters list. So the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, or MPAC, is currently undertaking the online voters list registration. You can use the website voterlookup.ca to check if you are on the preliminary list. An updated voters list will be provided to the clerk in late August/early September. The voters list is to be updated and reviewed by the clerk. A copy of the preliminaries voters list will be provided to you upon written request by the clerk. Voters are also encouraged to confirm their eligibility prior to election day, either through receipt of the voter notification cards or by contacting the clerk's department. And a note that the voters list is not a public document and it must remain confidential and be used for election purposes only. Next slide, please. So information for voters, voter notification cards will be sent out September 2022, and anyone who has not received a card should contact the clerk's office. All voters are required by law to provide proof of their identity and qualifying address at the polls. And any additions, corrections, deletions to the voters list will be accepted by the clerk's office or at the polls from September 1st, not at the polls, at September 1st until October 24th. Vote by proxy forms are available for voters who are unable to attend either the advance, online, or regular voting days. The prescribed form must be completed and returned to the clerk's office for certification before a proxy vote can be taken. And noting that a person may serve as a proxy for only one person, with the exception of immediate family members. Next slide, please. Okay, so next I'm going to share some information regarding candidates and scrutineers at the polls. So scrutineers must be appointed in writing by the candidate they are serving. And upon arriving at the voting location, candidates and scrutineers must identify themselves to election staff and will be required to complete an oath of secrecy. Only one candidate or scrutineer per ballot box representing each candidate is permitted at the voting locations. Candidates and scrutineers are not allowed to campaign in the voting location in any way. No campaign materials may be distributed or paraphernalia displayed. They're not allowed to engage electors waiting to vote or to solicit information on how an elector has voted. Candidates and scrutineers may ask to view the voters list as time permits from the deputy returning officer. And finally, candidates and scrutineers may not touch any ballots or ballot boxes to compromise the integrity of the election process in any way. Okay.
All right, so that wraps up the very first portion of what we are going to be talking about today, just in terms of the County of Brant specific information. Now, I did want to mention how people can ask questions and interact throughout the presentations. So what we are going to do is, if everybody could please take advantage of the Q&A function as questions come in. We are going to try to answer them as best that we can while they come in or throughout the presentation. If at any time anybody has any questions which we didn't get to, or which perhaps we are unable to answer, please feel free at clerks@brant.ca. You can feel free to reach out to us, or the Caitlin and Carolyn will be providing their contact information for any information which you might have from them.
I'll start once the presentation's on. Awesome, thank you so much. So hello, my name is Caitlin Reddick. Attending along with me today from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing is Carol Sauvé. I'd like to thank Brant County for inviting me and for hosting this candidate third-party advertiser information session. Next slide, please. Awesome, thanks. These slides are meant to be a summary of some of the sections and should not be relied on for legal or official purposes. I do want to stress that we are not lawyers and that you should always consult the legislation and seek legal advice when necessary. We will not be able to cover every aspect of the municipal election, but hope that this provides you with a better understanding of the process and legislation and improves your comfort level. Congratulations for taking an interest in your community and in local government, whether you're interested in serving on municipal council or on a school board or registering as a third-party advertiser. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide outlines some of the topics we want to cover during this session. The nomination process and how a candidate withdraws a nomination. Also, what happens if a candidate files a nomination and then changes his or her mind about which office they wish to run for. Some key dates, who is eligible to run for a municipal office and school boards and who isn't. General campaign rules and elections finances, such as campaign spending limits, contribution limits, campaign expenses, borrowing, what expenses are exempt from the spending limit, finance surplus deficit, financial reporting at the end of the campaign period. Compliance audits initiated by an application, penalties, general information about the voters list and voting about proxy voting, rights of scrutineers at the poll, recounts and resources, where you can find information detailed on the second to last slide. Next slide, please. Running for municipal office. So you're considering running for municipal office. Local government is the level of government that is closest to the people and is the most accessible and responsive to the needs of the community. You've made a decision to throw your hat in the ring, or you're thinking about it and are curious to know about how to go about it. Perhaps it's something you always wanted to pursue, or you want to make a difference, or you're not happy with some of the decisions that have been made, or you have a passion for politics. Regardless, it's a 4-year commitment that will be filled with challenges, excitement, disappointments, hard work, and a great deal of satisfaction. Ontario's municipal governments deliver local services, while the province establishes the legislative and policy framework. The Ontario government sets standards for many local services, such as land use planning, building regulation, and social housing. And the province provides funding to municipalities for delivery of some services. The ministry also works in partnership with the municipal sector to support efficient and responsive local governments that are sustainable and investment ready. Local government is a challenging environment with high expectations and limited resources, doing more with less. There's a limited understanding of roles of council and staff. Government is like no other business. You can't make everyone happy, so council must make difficult decisions in the best interest of the municipality. Please note that information about the role of council and staff and accountability and transparency can be found in the Councillor's Guide on the ministry's website. This guide is an excellent tool that can provide you with a lot more information about how municipalities operate and how council and staff can work together in the best interest of the municipality. Next slide, please. Thank you. Municipal office eligibility and ineligibility. You must be an eligible elector, which means you must be able to vote in the list above that shows voter eligibility as well as ineligibility to run and hold office. You can only be nominated if, as of the day you are nominated, you are qualified to hold that office under the Act and are not ineligible under the Municipal Elections Act or any other act or otherwise prohibited by law to be nominated or to hold the office. Please note that the municipal clerk is responsible for setting up and running the voting places used in a municipal election. The clerk must comply with any provincial or local public health measures that are in effect, and you may also put in place additional procedures that they consider necessary for conducting elections. If you have information, you should please contact your municipal clerk. Section 30 of the Municipal Elections Act states that a person shall not be considered an employee for this section by reason only of being a volunteer firefighter, as defined in the Fire Protection and Prevention Act. If a municipal employee wishes to run for office on that municipality's council, they must take a leave of absence before filing their nomination form. Section 30, subsection 4 of the Municipal Elections Act, if elected, he or she shall be deemed to have resigned from the employment immediately before making the declaration of office. An employee of a municipality who wants to run for an office in a different municipality doesn't have to take a leave of absence or resign, but they should check with their employer to see if there are any policies that could affect them. Next slide, please. Thank you. So questions about school board eligibility should be directed to the school board secretary. If you are an employee of any school board and you wish to run for a trustee position on any school board in the province, you must take an unpaid leave of absence before you file your nomination form. If elected, you must resign from your job, and you cannot work for a school board and be a trustee in Ontario at the same time. The following people are disqualified from being elected as a school board trustee: cannot be a clerk, deputy clerk, treasurer, or deputy treasurer of a municipality within the jurisdiction of the board, any person not eligible to vote in the municipality, an employee of a school board unless they take an unpaid leave of absence and resign if elected. Also, like the ineligibility for municipal office, a judge of any court, a member of a legislative assembly of Ontario, a senator, or a member of the House of Commons. And lastly, an inmate of a penal or correctional institution under sentence of imprisonment. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Carol to continue.
Next slide, please. All right, so a third-party advertiser is an individual, corporation, or trade union that is registered in the municipality to promote, support, or oppose a candidate, or a yes or no answer to a question on ballot. A third-party advertisement means an advertisement in any broadcast, print, electronic, or other medium that has the purpose of promoting, supporting, or opposing either A, a candidate, or B, a yes or no answer to a question on the ballot. Next slide, please. So only the following persons and entities are eligible to file a notice of registration: an individual who is normally a resident in Ontario, a corporation that carries on business in Ontario, a trade union that holds bargaining rights for employees in Ontario. So you have the list of ineligible. Regarding item 5, any group or organization that is not a corporation, this includes groups like associations or clubs that are not incorporated. Next slide, please. So the first day for filing nominations is May 1st, 2022. Note that this falls on a Sunday, so unless the clerk has policies in place to allow electronic filing, candidates will have to wait until Monday, May 2nd, 2022 to file their nomination. The last day and time for filing nominations for the 2022 election is on Friday, August 19, 2022 at 2 p.m. The nomination filing fee is only refunded once the candidate submits a completed financial disclosure of all financial transactions made up to the date the nomination was withdrawn. Nomination day for a regular election is the 4th Friday in August in the year of the election. So in 2022, that falls on August 19, 2022. So local election policies may state a candidate must personally attend the clerk's office to withdraw candidacy. So if a candidate is in the hospital or incapacitated, this may not be feasible. If a candidate withdraws a nomination, they are still required to file a campaign financial statement covering all of the financial transactions made in the campaign. If they haven't spent any money or raised any funds, they can click on the box, sign the form, and it's complete. If a nomination is withdrawn, the candidate is entitled to a refund of their nomination filing fee only after they file their financial auditor's statements by the required deadline. So an issue that's raised infrequently, but is of importance nonetheless, is what happens to a campaign which has been opened and a candidate decides to run for a different office. In the candidate's guide, the minister has provided a few examples showing what happens when candidates change their mind about which office to run for after they've filed a nomination paper. So next slide, please. Candidates must complete Form 1, this is the nomination paper, and submit it to the clerk along with the applicable nomination filing fee. The filing fee is $200 for anyone running for the head of council and $100 for all other offices. The clerk must be satisfied that you are eligible to run in order to certify your nomination. The clerk can ask you to show identification or fill out an additional form to prove that you are eligible to run for that particular office. Nomination form must have an original signature. If your nomination is not certified by the clerk, your name will not appear on the ballot. Now, if there's a ward system, as long as you are eligible to vote in the municipality, you may run in any ward. If you do run in a ward where you do not live, you will not be able to vote for yourself, as you must vote in the ward in which you reside. So in addition to the legislative requirements, each municipal clerk may establish their own local processes and procedures related to submitting a nomination. So it is important to contact the clerk so you understand the process in that municipality. Next slide, please. So municipal council candidates are required to obtain 25 nomination signatures on Form 2. So this, under Ontario Regulation 101-97, it provides an exemption to this requirement for candidates in municipalities with less than 4,000 electors. Just note that the requirement for nominators to sign nomination forms does not apply to school board candidates. Nominators can nominate more than one candidate and are not required to vote for that candidate. Nominators must meet the eligibility requirements of a municipal elector at the time they sign the nomination form. In a ward system, the nominator can be anyone who's eligible to vote in the municipality, not just the ward. Both the clerk and the candidate are entitled to rely upon the information provided by the nominator. So if the nominator did not meet the eligibility requirements when they signed the document, then they could be held accountable under the penalty section of the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide, please. So occasionally a candidate changes their mind and decides to run for a different office. You can run for only one office at a time. If a candidate files a second nomination, the first nomination is deemed to be withdrawn. If a candidate decides to run for another office, they've already collected the 25 endorsement signatures. They can use these endorsements for the other office. If a candidate decides to run for a different office on the same council or school board, and both positions are elected at large, everything from the first campaign is transferred to the second campaign, and only one financial statement needs to be filed. So unless the candidate decides to run for a different office, on the same council or school board, and one or both offices is elected by ward, the two campaigns must be kept separate and two financial statements must be filed. Next slide, please. So individuals, corporations, and trade unions may register to be third-party advertisers. There's no registration fee for a third-party advertiser. So a third-party advertiser would register with the clerk at the local municipality. An individual, as per Section 88, subsection 6, an individual, corporation, or trade union may, in person or by an agent, file with the clerk of the municipality responsible for conducting an election a notice of registration to be registered third party for the election, and the notice must be filed in the prescribed form and must include a declaration of qualification signed by the individual or by a representative of the corporation or trade union, as the case may be. A notice of registration may only be filed with the clerk of a local municipality. So once registered, they may advertise in support of or opposition to any candidate being elected by voters in that municipality. So this would include council, trustee, and directly elected upper tier candidates. To advertise regarding questions on the ballot will require registration as a third-party advertiser. For a regular election, the registration cannot be filed earlier than the first day for filing nominations and cannot be filed later than the Friday before voting day during the clerk's office hours. So Section 88, subsection 6 notes that once the clerk certifies the notice of registration, the individual, corporation, or trade union is a registered third party for the election. Third-party advertising is geographically based, and it is structured around the concept of influencing a specific set of voters in a specific location. Registering in the municipality where the third-party advertiser hopes to influence votes allows flexibility to support or advocate against any candidate in that specific geography. So if an individual wants to influence voters in more than one municipality, for example, over the 3 municipalities covered in a specific school board trustee election, he or she would have to register in each of the 3 municipalities and conduct their activities as 3 separate campaigns. So if the municipality is satisfied that there has been a contravention of the act, then it can ask the third-party advertiser to remove the advertisement or discontinue the advertising. I'm going to hand over the next slides to Caitlin.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. So third-party advertisers registration is deemed to be withdrawn if they file a nomination. This means that their advertising campaign would automatically end when they file their nomination. If a corporation or trade union is registered as a third-party advertiser, it would not be affected by a person filing a nomination, as the person would not be the same entity. A third-party advertiser and a candidate would need to be careful to distance their activities, as third-party advertising may not take place under the direction of a candidate. The existing campaign finance rules would not change. Finances relating to a third-party advertising campaign cannot be transferred to a candidate's campaign. The existing campaign finance rules would not change. A third-party advertiser who withdraws and closes their campaign cannot transfer that campaign to someone else. To maintain financial transparency around third-party advertising campaigns, the financial statements of advertisers who end their campaign early should reflect their finances as of the day their campaign ended. The registration period for third-party advertisers runs until the Friday before voting day, October 21st, 2022, or the last day the clerk's office is open before voting day in a by-election. Next slide, please. Contributions. Campaign accounts are only required if the candidate or third-party advertiser raises or spends money. So for acclamations and campaigns where no funds are raised or spent, there is no need for a campaign account. Trade unions and corporations are not eligible to contribute to candidates' campaigns, although they can participate in the election as third-party advertisers or make contributions to third-party advertising campaigns. Third-party advertisers will generally need to follow the same rules for raising campaign funds and financial reporting as candidates for office. Municipalities must establish rules and procedures for regarding the use of municipal or local board resources during the campaign period. This must be passed by May 1st in the year of the election. This will encourage accountability and transparency, so ensure that you are aware of your municipality's policy in this regard. The practice of municipalities providing candidate contact information on their websites is not a contribution. Please note that generally the same contribution rules will apply to third-party advertiser campaigns as a candidates. Refer to both when the rules applies to both. Next slide, please. Thank you. Contributions from the candidate and their spouse are considered to have come from the same person and count against the self-contribution limit. The rules for determining whether corporations are considered to be one contributor are clarified. If one corporation controls the other directly or indirectly, then they are considered to be the same contributor. If the corporations are owned or controlled by the same person or groups of persons, either directly or indirectly, they are considered to be the same contributor. Next slide, please. Thank you. Volunteers. So the value of services provided by volunteers is generally not considered to be a contribution. Please take note of the next few bullets I'm going to mention. We get a lot of questions about this. If a professional, such as an accountant or a lawyer, volunteers to provide services for which they would normally be paid, the market value of the service must be recorded as a contribution by the volunteer as a campaign expense. As mentioned previously, only third-party advertisers can accept contributions from corporations and unions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Campaign contributions are monies, goods, or services given to a candidate for his or her election campaign. Cash contributions may only be accepted up to $25. Contributions more than $25 must be made by check, money order, or by a method that clearly shows where the funds came from. Fundraising functions are activities or events held by or on behalf of a candidate for the primary purpose of raising money for the candidate's campaign. The price of admission to a fundraising function is a campaign contribution, and a receipt must be issued for a full amount. Receipts must be issued for every contribution and should contain the name and address of the contributor and the amount and date. Next slide, please. Thank you. Contribution limits. The limit on contributions to any one candidate or third-party advertiser is $1,200, except for the City of Toronto mayoral candidates, in which case the amount is $2,500. The individual contribution amount has increased from $750 to $1,200, but the aggregate amount of $5,000 stays the same. Since candidates and third-party advertisers are required to inform contributors of contribution limits, you may want to include the limits on the receipts provided to the contributors. Next slide, please. Self-funding limits. Self-funding limit for municipal council candidates based on the number of electors voting for the office to a maximum of $25,000 per candidate. The formula for calculating the limit is $7,500 plus 20 cents per elector for head of council and $5,000 plus 20 cents per elector for other council offices. The highest self-funding limit that anyone can possibly have is $25,000. If the formula works out to a number that is over $25,000, they still get the $25,000 limit. If the formula works out to less than $25,000, then they get whatever the formula works out to. There are no self-funding limits for school board candidates or third-party advertisers. Now I'll hand it over to Carol to continue. Thanks.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So borrowing. While candidates can open their campaign account with their own funds, the candidate cannot loan funds to his or her campaign to kickstart it with the intention of getting it all back. The only way that a candidate can reclaim this startup amount is after the election campaign period ends and prior to filing the financial statement. The candidate or his or her spouse may be refunded any contributions from surplus. You can't receive a loan from family members or from any corporate accounts that you may have access to. So the loan isn't considered to be campaign income, and paying it back is not a campaign expense. But if you or your spouse guarantee the loan and the campaign does not repay all of it, the remaining balance is considered to be a contribution, since the guarantor is basically providing the campaign the means to repay the loan. So keep in mind the contribution limit for the candidate and spouse if you're borrowing. Any interest that the campaign pays on the loan is a campaign expense. Next slide, please. So expenses, those are the replacement value of goods retained by the person, individual, corporation, or trade union from any previous election in the municipality and used in the current election. The value of contributions of goods and services, audit and accounting fees, interest on loans under section 88 subsection 17, the cost of holding fundraising functions, the cost of holding parties and making other expressions of appreciation after the close of voting. For a candidate, expenses relating to a recount or a proceeding under section 83, expenses relating to a compliance audit, expenses that are incurred by a candidate with a disability or a registered third party who is an individual with a disability are directly related to the disability and would not have been incurred but for the election to which the expenses relate. The cost of election campaign advertisements or third-party advertisements, as the case may be. So for greater certainty, the cost of holding fundraising functions does not include costs related to events or activities that are organized for such purposes as promoting public awareness of a candidate and at which the soliciting of contributions is incidental, or promoting materials in which the soliciting of contributions is incidental. Next slide, please. So candidates and third-party advertisers should become familiar with campaign expense provisions. Campaign expenses are those costs incurred by the candidate or on the candidate's behalf during his or her campaign or by a third-party advertiser during their campaign. The nomination filing fee is no longer an expense and is not included on the financial disclosure form. Goods and services donated to the campaign are also expenses and must be reported. A receipt must be provided for fair market value. Only nominated persons and or third-party advertisers can incur expenses during their campaign period. Payment of any campaign expense must be drawn from the campaign account, and a receipt providing the details and proof of payment must be obtained. All expenses must be reported in the relevant financial disclosure form to be filed with the clerk by the candidate or the third-party advertiser. So with respect to campaign inventory, If you ran in the last election and you want to use leftover goods such as signs or office supplies, you have to determine what the current market value for those goods is and what it would cost you if you were to purchase them today. These amounts are recorded as an expense. Conversely, if you end up with leftover inventory at the end of this campaign and it becomes your personal property, but you want to store them to use in another election, any costs for storage are not considered campaign expenses. Next slide, please. So the spending limit formula for candidates and the maximum amount for parties after voting day are set out in Ontario Regulation 101/97. The clerk calculates the spending limits twice. So the first time upon a candidate filing the nomination form, the clerk shall calculate the spending limit based on the number of electors on the voters list as it existed on September 15, 2018. The second calculation is based on the number of electors on the voters list as it exists on September 15, 2022. So note that this calculation must be provided to candidates on or before September 25, 2022. Whichever number is higher is the spending limit and the clerk's calculation is final. Next slide, please. So clerks will continue to provide estimates of the spending limits. Dates have been slightly amended with transition dates from the 2018 election. Candidates will be required to inform their contributors of the contribution limits. That means how much a contributor can contribute to an individual candidate's campaign, and the aggregate limit on contributions to any one council or local board election. Spending limit, again, is to be provided by September 25th. If a third-party advertiser has registered in more than one municipality, each registration is a separate campaign with its own spending limits. The campaign finance rules are generally the same for third-party advertisers as they are for candidates. They're subject to the same contribution limits and they have calculated spending limits. So this includes financial filing requirements, requests for extensions, and records. Third-party advertisers are also required to ensure contributions and expenses are tracked and accounted for. Proper record retention, proper direction is provided to those incurring expenses or accepting contributions on their behalf, and that spending limits are adhered to. Next slide, please. So most expenses are subject to the spending limit. Those listed in the slide aren't. So those are expenses related to fundraising functions are exempt from the campaign spending limit, but in order to qualify as a fundraising function, an event must have the raising of money as its primary purpose. Campaign events at which incidental fundraising takes place do not qualify as fundraising functions. Similarly, a brochure promoting awareness of a candidate that contains contact information to make campaign contributions doesn't qualify as a fundraising function. Expenses that were subject to the spending limit if incurred before voting day are not subject to the spending limit if incurred after voting day. Next slide, please. So third-party advertisers will be subject to two spending limits, a general spending limit and a separate limit for expenses related to parties and expressions of appreciation after the close of voting. Ontario Regulation 101/97 provides the following formula for calculating third-party spending limits. So it's $5,000 plus 5 cents per elector to a maximum of $25,000. The formula used is based on the number of electors entitled to vote in an election in the municipality. So the Municipal Elections Act also provides that the spending limit for parties and other expressions of appreciation after voting day be set at 10% of the general spending limit. This would be consistent with the spending limit in place for candidates. I'm going to hand over the next slides to Caitlin.
Thank you. Sorry, I was answering questions. So next slide, please. Thank you. So campaign finance rules. As a candidate or third-party advertiser, it is important that you be fully aware of the responsibilities regarding election spending and accepting campaign contributions. A question that we are asked each municipal election is whether there is a requirement for every candidate to have a chief financial officer, and the answer is no. We suggest that you familiarize yourself with sections 88.8 through to 88.21 of the Municipal Elections Act, and also the financial statements that you will be required to file. This will help guide you in organizing your records and how they have to be reported. You're required under the Municipal Elections Act to keep accurate records and open a campaign bank account if you are spending any money or accepting any contributions. A bank account is not required if a candidate or third-party advertiser does not receive nor spend money. Next slide, please. Thank you. Candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep complete and accurate financial statements during the course of their campaigns. All contributions and expenses are to be accounted for and disclosed by the candidate on the relevant prescribed financial form. All candidates and third-party advertisers are required to keep all campaign financial records until after November 15, 2026, when a new council takes office. These rules apply whether you are elected or not. Next slide, please. Thank you. Campaign finance rules continued. So please store receipts in a secure place as they're valuable documents. Receipts must be signed by the candidate or his or her designate. It is good practice to have a receipt that is a multi-part form, one for the contributor and one or more for the candidate's records. Receipts should be sequentially numbered. Open a bank account which provides monthly statements and cancel checks. Produce duplicate deposit slips for every deposit, listing the names of the contributors and the amounts received from each. Maintain a petty cash fund to handle minor expenses and obtain invoices to support all payments from the fund. At any time, the cash on hand plus the total amount of invoices should equal the original amount of the petty cash fund. The fund can be replenished periodically by a check drawn on the campaign account in an amount equal to the total amount of the invoices. Candidates and third-party advertisers may find it useful to look over Form 4 for candidates and Form 8 for third-party advertisers, respectively, at the beginning of their campaign to give them an idea of what information will be needed to report on at the end of the campaign. Next slide, please. Campaign advertisements. So the period for third-party advertisers, as shown on the slide, is the period when the rules for third-party advertisers applies. In 2022, that is from May 1st until the close of voting at 8 p.m. on October 24th. Third-party advertisers and candidates are required to identify themselves on signs and advertisements. For more information, please refer to the Municipal Act, sections 88.3 for candidates and section 88.4 for third-party advertisers. Next slide, please. The broadcaster or publisher of a third-party or candidate advertisement shall maintain records containing the following information for a period of 4 years after the date the advertisement appears, and shall permit the public to inspect the records during normal business hours. The name of the candidate, registered third-party advertiser, the name, business address, and telephone number of the individual who deals with the broadcaster or publisher under the direction of the candidate or third-party advertiser, a copy of the advertisement or the means of reproducing it for inspection, a statement of the charge made for its appearance. Next slide, please. The next few slides are really important, so please pay attention. Financial statements. Section 88.25 of the Municipal Elections Act states that all candidates are required to file Form 4 with the clerk regardless of how much or how little they spent or fundraised. If you file a nomination form, you must file a Form 4. This form is required even if you withdrew your nomination or were acclaimed. If you are registered as a third-party advertiser, you must complete Form 8. A candidate may resubmit a financial statement or correct an error up until the filing deadline. The clerk is required to make public a report of which candidates filed financial statements and which did not. Next slide, please. Thank you. Financial statements continue. The appointment of an auditor by the candidate is mandatory if expenses or contributions exceed $10,000. Auditors must be licensed under the Public Accounting Act, and please note that the campaign statements are public documents. Now I'll hand it over to Carol to continue. Thank you.
Next slide, please. So candidates can file their financial documents at any time after voting day to January 3rd, adjusted from December 31st as it falls on a Saturday. Filing the financial statement ends the campaign period. So this will make it easier for acclamations in campaigns where little or no expense is incurred. Clerks will be required to report whether candidates have met their financial filing obligation and publish that report on the municipal website or in another electronic form. This needs to be done by April 30th in the case of a regular election or within 90 days of a by-election. Clerks can determine the conditions for the electronic filing or of financial statements. Next slide, please. So the nomination fee is only refundable if the financial statement is filed on time. A candidate third-party advertiser who misses the filing deadline may file within the 30-day grace period, provided a $500 late filing fee is paid to the municipality. So a candidate who chooses to file within the 30-day grace period will be subject to both the $500 late filing fee as well as the loss of their nomination refund. A candidate third-party advertiser may resubmit a financial statement to correct an error up until the filing deadline. Next slide, please. So surpluses. When filing the financial statement, a candidate or third-party advertiser with a campaign surplus must pay the entire amount to the clerk. Prior to paying over any surplus funds to the clerk, a candidate or a third-party advertiser is entitled to a refund of any contributions they or their spouse, if an individual, made to the campaign, not to anyone else. The amount that may be refunded is the lesser of the amount of the relevant contribution or the amount of the surplus. So the clerk is required to place surplus monies in trust for use by the candidate if they need it for a compliance audit. The clerk is also required to place surplus monies in trust for the use by the third-party advertiser if they need it for a compliance audit. If neither the candidate nor third-party advertiser requires the funds for these purposes, it then becomes the property of the municipality or school board. Next slide, please. So every council and school board must establish a compliance audit committee. Members of a compliance audit committee cannot be members of the council or school board, an employee, a candidate in the election, or a registered third-party advertiser. The clerk is to review contributions and to prepare a report for consideration by the compliance audit committee if a contributor appears to have exceeded any contribution limits. So this process is related to reviewing contributions as reported on the financial statements and is not connected to the compliance audit process. If it's apparent to the clerk that a contributor has exceeded one or more of the contribution limits, the clerk would report this to the committee, which would meet to determine whether to proceed with legal action. The legislation does not specify what details are to be provided in the report to the committee. Electors entitled to vote in an election may apply for a compliance audit even if the candidate has not filed a financial statement. So the application must be in writing and set out the electors' reasons for why they believe the Municipal Election Act has been contravened. The application must be submitted to the municipal clerk or the secretary of the school board within 90 days of the filing deadline. The Compliance Audit Committee will consider the application and decide whether to retain an auditor to undertake a compliance audit of the candidate's financial return. Next slide, please. So the Compliance Audit Committee is required to provide brief written reasons for its decision. Compliance Audit Committee meetings are required to be open to the public, but the committee may deliberate in private. Electors can apply for a compliance audit of a third-party advertiser's campaign's finances. The minister has the authority to make a regulation setting out qualifications for compliance audit committee members. So the written reasons for the committee's decision shall be given to the candidate, the clerk with whom the candidate filed his or her nomination, the secretary of the local board, if it's applicable, and the applicant. If an audit occurs, the report must be circulated to the same individuals. The Compliance Audit Committee considers the auditor's report. So if the compliance audit determines that there has been an apparent contravention of the Municipal Elections Act, the committee will decide whether to proceed with legal action. Decisions of the committee may be appealed to the Superior Court of Justice. A person who believes that a candidate has contravened the Municipal Elections Act may proceed with legal action without having first obtained a compliance audit. Next slide, please. So the Municipal Election Act, Section 90, subsection 2 states that an offense described in subsection 3 constitutes a corrupt practice, and a person who commits it is on conviction disqualified from voting at an election until the next regular election has taken place after the election to which the offense relates. That's in addition to being liable to any other penalty provided for in this act. So subsection 3, no person shall directly or indirectly offer, give, lend, or promise, or agree to give or lend any valuable consideration in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. Advance, pay, or cause to be paid money intending that it be used to commit an offense referred to in clause A, or knowing that it will be used to repay money used in that way. Give, procure, or promise, or agree to procure an office or employment in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. Apply for, accept, or agree to accept any valuable consideration or office or employment in connection with the exercise or non-exercise of an elector's vote. Give, procure, or promise, or agree to procure an office or employment to induce a person to become a candidate, refrain from becoming a candidate, or withdraw his or her candidacy. Next slide, please. So please refer to the chart to understand the penalties for individuals, candidates, and third-party advertisers. Ineligibility to vote is a penalty if you are convicted of a corrupt practice. I'm going to hand over the next slide to Caitlin.
Thank you, Carol. Next slide, please. Voters list. So the preliminary list of electors as corrected by the clerk becomes the voters list on September 1st, 2022. The clerk determines how and when individuals can apply to have their name and information corrected or added to or removed from the voters list. The clerk can also remove a name from the list if the clerk becomes aware that the person has died. Section 23 of the Municipal Elections Act states that the clerk shall not provide a copy of the voters list under subsection 3 or part of the voters list under subsection 4 until September 1st. Next slide, please. Thank you. One copy of the voters list can be provided to each municipal candidate or trustee candidate. Requests must be made to the clerk in writing. Candidates running an award are entitled only to that portion of the list that contains the names of the electors entitled to vote for that office. Again, please take note of this, the next few bullets. We get a lot of questions on these. So copies of the voters list are not available before September 1st, 2022. The voters list shall not be posted in a public place. The voters list shall not be made available to the public by posting on an internet website or via any other print or electronic medium of mass communication. Third-party advertisers are not eligible to receive a copy of the voters list. Candidates running an award are entitled only to that portion of the list that contains the names of the electors entitled to vote for that office. Next slide, please. Thank you. The clerk may require anyone who receives a copy of the list to sign a receipt acknowledging the list is only used for election purposes and any other use would be in violation of the Municipal Elections Act. An elector's name shall appear only once on the list. An award system, an elector is entitled to vote only in a ward where he or she resides. Next slide, please. Thank you. Voting proxy. There are a number of reasons why somebody would appoint someone else to vote on their behalf, including absence from the area, illness, or etc. No appointments until all nominations are closed. Clerks may designate a place and time for presentation of proxy voting application and appointment forms for clerk's certification. On days of advanced vote, the clerk's office or another location may be designated and open from noon to 5 p.m. Please refer to section 44, subsection 6. Assignment of proxy vote is the responsibility of an eligible voter to appoint an identified eligible voter. Eligible proxy may exercise only one proxy vote unless the proxy is acting on behalf of a spouse, sibling, parent, child, grandparent, or grandchild. Proxy forms must have original signatures, and please check with the municipal clerk if proxy voting is available, as municipalities that use alternative voting may not permit proxy voting. Next slide, please. Thank you. Scrutineers. Only a candidate may appoint scrutineers to represent him or her during the voting and the counting of votes, including during a recount. Third-party advertisers cannot appoint scrutineers. In a traditional election where voting takes place at a poll, the deputy returning officer, DRO, is in charge of the activity in the voting place, and the DRO may ask the scrutineer to leave if the scrutineer is not complying with the legislation. Candidates / scrutineers should respect that the DRO must ensure fairness, access, privacy, and security of the vote. Please check with the clerk to see if a list of scrutineers' rights is being given to an election staff at the poll. If so, use that list or prepare your own and hand out to each of your scrutineers a list of their rights, which are spelled out in section 47, subsection 5 of the Municipal Elections Act. Next slide, please. Thank you. Recounts. A recount is automatic if the vote is tied. Councils and school boards have the option of establishing policies prior to the election that also allow for an automatic recount. Council still retains the option to pass a resolution for a recount within 30 days after the clerk has declared the results of the election. An eligible elector can apply to the courts for a recount within 30 days of the clerk's declaration of the results. Next slide, please. I know that the County of Brant has mentioned this, but I'm just going to reiterate the key dates. So voting date is Monday, October 24th, 2022, between 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. unless reduced hours are set out in a bylaw for retirement homes and institutions, or council has passed a bylaw to open voting earlier than 10 a.m. The campaign period, the time when a candidate can accept contributions and incur election expenses, runs from the date the nomination is submitted up until January 3rd, 2023. The campaign period, the time the third-party advertiser can incur expenses begins on the date that their registration is certified. The earliest date is May 1st, 2022 until January 3rd, 2023. The deadline for the filing of the campaign financial statement in the clerk's office is Friday, March 31st, 2023. No later than 2 p.m. All candidates and third-party advertisers must file this statement regardless of how much they spent or received in contributions. Next slide, please. Thank you. Resources. The first link will take you to the eLaws website where all provincial legislation is available online, including the associated regulations. You may want to be familiar with the Municipal Elections Act, the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, and if running for a school board, the Education Act. The second link is to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing website. From the site, you will be able to access the 2022 voters, candidates, and third-party advertisers guides. Lastly, the Municipal World website. If you click on the icon bookshop, it illustrates a list of books that are related to running for municipal office. They are available to purchase online. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this concludes our presentation. If you have any further questions, please reach out to the Municipal Advisor for Brant County, Jane Parnell, at jane.parnell@ontario.ca. We'll be staying on until the end of the presentation. So if you have additional questions for now, you can write them in the chat and I'll try my best to answer them. Thank you for having us.
I guess it's my turn. There we go.
It is. Thank you very much. Yes, I was just going to introduce you. Now up next, we have Councillor Mark Laferriere. He is currently a sitting councillor with the County of Brant, and he is going to provide an overview on his experience as a councillor and what he feels anybody who is interested in running for office in the County of Brant should know. So.
Thanks so much, Alicia. Yeah, so my name is Mark Laferriere. I am a councillor for Ward 2, one of two, and that'll come up a few times that there are two in these ward parameters, because I think it's an important piece that people do miss. And I'm going to break up the little discussion I'm going to do into three sections. One on sort of what I found helpful pre-election and during the election, and then the stage of onboarding if you are elected, and then a little bit on just sort of thoughts about best practices after I've had some practice after about that first year of being elected. So the first on the pre-election and election, one of the greatest things about a municipal system specific to the ward piece, and this is the thing, I'm going to talk about the County of Brant specifically, and I'm going to talk about our system, which includes things like ward councillors, 2 per, etc. I won't be speaking to, you know, running for mayor or things like that, because I've not had that experience, and I won't have that experience. But one of the things I really want to touch on is what it looks like sort of boots on the ground during these three stages. So one of the best things about our system is that you truly, and I really mean this isn't political talk, you are truly not running against anyone. In fact, if you run against somebody in a 2-vote system, there are 2 votes for ward council, you may end up losing potential support, right? So my ward mate is Steve Howes. When we were knocking on doors, I might have knocked on 5 of his best friends' doors. And if I was there talking about what a bad candidate I thought Steve Howes was, et cetera, and I don't think he was a bad candidate, but if I was to say that, then I actually might be losing potential support from people who are considering somebody else for their second vote. And that's something to really remember. I think sometimes we get in this mindset of, you know, rah, 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 go, beat the other person up, tear them down. And in a ward system, for 2 reasons. 1, it's just not good for the public good. But 2, you don't know who you're going to work with, right? You're going to work with whoever the public sends you to work with. And you better be able to work with them, because that's what's best for the public good. So really keep that in mind, that you actually have to be able to work with everybody, not just everybody that you might be running with, I'll say instead of against, in your ward, but also everybody who is coming in from other wards. Right? So, you know, no dirty tricks, be nice to the other candidates, and especially be nice to the volunteers. At some points in the campaign, you will be door knocking and run into different folks from different campaigns, including the candidates, if you're a candidate, including their campaign managers, their volunteers. Be nice to them, right? This isn't, this is a community. It's one community. It's not worth sort of creating that divisive atmosphere that it's already being created in the world. Now, I've run federally in the past. I ran twice federally, and you are in those systems really, truly running against several other people, and often people you like. And you know, you're taking votes away from somebody. It's a zero-sum game. It's not the same with a municipal ward race. So please keep that in mind. Also, another practical piece, if you're door knocking, a lot of staff live in the county. So you might knock on their door, but they're not going to be able to discuss county business with you. They're not going to be able to say that who they're voting for. They're not going to be able to take a sign. And if you have ideas, you know, don't pitch the county staff. They'll be polite, but they'll be quiet and they'll say, I can't talk to you about any of this, and you know, all the best. Right. So please keep that in mind. And if you are elected, you'll see them when you are elected, working with them, and you know, sometimes you need to get information from them. So just that's a little thing that won't be in an official presentation that I want to share with you. The other piece I really want you to think about is, why are you running? Right. One, sort of why you specifically. Are you running to stop somebody else? Well, you know, that's not a great reason. There's this wonderful, I'd love you to Google this wonderful article called 5 Terrible Reasons to Run in a Municipal Election. It was written by a woman, former councillor out in Alberta. But it's a wonderful article that I hope every person running for the first time reads, because there are terrible reasons to run, and we'll go through some of those. So why are you running? Why you? And also, what issues and projects do you want to see? And then the biggest question of that is, are they actually municipal? right? Because the municipal government has the smallest tax base in terms of tax dollars to work with. Often, a lot of the issues people care about might have a municipal component, but aren't really decided by the municipality. Are you actually, wanting to run for maybe provincial or support somebody provincially or federally, because those issues are actually more prevalent there. Just keep that in mind and do a bit of a scan on that. I would really suggest people ask themselves those questions and write down some of those answers and see if it, take a couple days, read it again and see if it holds up as to good enough reason to do so. One reason that is terrible to never, ever, ever run for something is because you need a job. Right? An election might be the longest job interview you'll ever have, with the most amounts of interviews every door you knock on, but there's no guarantee you'll get it. And also the pay is very minimal. Just full disclosure, after taxes, I get about a little less than $400 a week. And it's a lot of hours for $400 a week, right? So don't run because you need a job. Don't run to build your resume. Run because of public service and wanting to do good public service. Keep all receipts and excellent records for the financial statement afterwards. I know you just heard a lot there and it might have scared you off. Don't be scared. It's actually easier than an hour-long presentation might make it sound, but you are going to want to review. Another thing too is, don't go to the grocery store, and also while you're picking up, bananas and pasta, also pick up things for your campaign. You buy things separately, right? I have separate receipts that are easy to collate at the end of this, because if you aren't elected, you're going to be busy because you take a lot of time during an election. And if you are elected, you're going to be even busier. So you're going to want to make that process as simple as possible. It's going to take you at least a couple hours, if not longer, depending on the size of your campaign. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about social media. Social media is important, but it's not the same thing as door knocking. It shouldn't take the place of community events, door knocking, election related events. Also, social media, if done poorly, can really hurt the community. If you say things that aren't factual, if you say things that are rude or cruel in some way, remember there's no privacy on the internet as well. And there's also sometimes a lack of context, but you can actually create a lot of ill will. And I don't just mean for you, I mean in the community. The sort of discussion of politics is becoming more divisive already. We don't need candidates and elected people making that worse. That said, sometimes it's great to correct the record. Sometimes it's really good to engage, but we'll talk a little bit about how to balance that as we go through a little bit more of this presentation. Okay, so that's the first bit, is the sort of pre-election and election. You may have volunteers, you may not. You may have signs up, etc. You have a deadline where you have to get those signs down. I missed the announcement of the election who won because I was busy taking down signs myself, and I had a volunteer who was helping, 2 volunteers who were helping me. But it's a lot of work, that piece, and it's I think really not a good practice, specifically if you don't win, to just let your sign stay up for weeks and weeks on end. People, by law will be called and things like that as well. So keep that in mind, that there's a lot of grunt work. You have a lot of folks who will want to volunteer on a campaign to help with strategy, high-level strategy. No, we're talking small wards. There isn't really a high-level strategy. And also there's, every campaign I've ever been on, everybody who does strategy also knocks on doors and puts in signs and works the phones and scrutineers at voting places and offers to take folks to drive them to the election place, etc. Right? Like, that's the actual sort of community service model of a campaign, if you do it in what is, in my opinion, the best possible way. So keep all of that in mind. One other thing too is with internet voting. It's wonderful. I support it. Early voting is also wonderful and supportive, something I support. But there are issues with it too, right? People will not understand how to do it. I've helped on other campaigns in other municipalities where they've had early online voting, and things will happen like a candidate will knock on the door, talk to a person, and they'll say, "Oh, you know what? I didn't realize I had 2 votes for ward councillor. Somebody else knocked on my door, 3 days ago. I voted for them and them only. I didn't realize I had 2 votes." And that is a big, big piece here. You're all, and hopefully all of you know this, that you have 1 vote for mayor, 2 votes for councillor. but some of you may not. And I know I knocked on doors of folks who voted every single election since the County of Brant's been the County of Brant since 1999. And they voted and they vote regularly, and they had no idea, and through no fault of anybody's, they just had no idea they had up to 2 votes for council, right? So that's a dynamic to keep in mind, and it's something that I hope the county, all council members, the clerks, everybody pushes, just because it's another democratic option, but because we get a lot of our political information from media, from traditional like shows and movies and things that are fictional. I've never seen a fictionalized account of an election that said something about 2 votes for ward. And people have lived in other places where they only had 1 vote for a ward councillor, and where the ward councillors are full-time, not part-time, and things like that. So these are dynamics just to keep in mind that you may bump up against, and people in the community may bump up against during the pre-election and the election. Okay, so that's the sort of first point about the pre and election. But the next is onboarding. Like, hey, you got elected, congratulations, it's wonderful, but it's a lot, and it's especially a lot in the first few months and the first year. The hours are long, and it's not just Tuesday night council. I think a lot of folks who, and I've talked to a few people who are considering running, and they sometimes bump up against this, which is they have a full-time job that isn't flexible. Now, we have a number of council members who are retired. We also have a number of council members who work, both very possible, but you have to understand how it's just not just the Tuesday meetings. You might have a 9-to-5 job and you'll be able to make every 6 o'clock Tuesday meeting, but will you be able to make the Wednesday special meetings and the Thursday community information nights? If you're put on committees, are the committees, what are they, evening committees that you can make, or are they daytime committees? Are you able to make social services at 9 a.m. on the first Wednesday of every month? That's a city and county joint committee. That's 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, right? Or is that just a no-go? And you don't, once you're elected, you don't have personal control over what committees you're on. You can try to trade, you can ask mayor and council if you can be moved from some, and for the most part, that may be possible, but it also may not be, right? There's a democratic process there. It's not an HR process about who's appointed to which committees and community pieces. There's a question here from Elisa. Are these meetings in person or Zoom? It depends. For the last 2 years plus, it's been a Zoom for the most part. But currently, council has voted on a hybrid model where people are able to attend in one way or the other. The city of Brantford, who we do a lot of joint committees with, they also have a hybrid model for most of their joint committees. But it may not be, and that could change, right? Council next term could decide, no, it's in person only, or not, and that's the right of the full members of council to vote on at that time. For example, when I started on council, the first year, we had a different committee structure. We had, I think it was one committee was Monday or Tuesdays at 3 o'clock or so, or 2 o'clock. There was another committee that was Fridays in the afternoon. And then there were 2 or 3 that were Tuesday nights, but some at 6, some at 7. Now we've streamlined the committee process, which actually makes it more reliable for citizens and people who are elected and staff, that our major committees and council itself are generally speaking Tuesdays at 6 o'clock. But again, are you on library board? Will you be put on police services, which I believe is a morning meeting? I'm not on police services, but just to keep those things in mind and really look at that committee piece. So juggling work and meetings, yes. But again, you may have very flexible, you may not. I've been on committees. My full-time job, I'm a professor at Mohawk College, where for 4 months, I'm sorry, I have a class. I'm on the Chamber of Commerce. I have a class every Wednesday at noon this semester. And this semester, I've only been able to make one of those meetings. And that's, again, we just do a brief presentation. I often email it instead. But if it was a different committee and it was one that involved me needing to vote and things like that, not just sitting as a reporter for the county and a partner from the county, then that would be a lot tougher, right? If a vote between the city of Brantford and the county of Brant came down to one vote and it was a committee I was appointed to that I couldn't make, generally speaking, that wouldn't be, to me, that wouldn't be ideal. So I work full time. I have 2 kids. I think my attendance all the committees I'm appointed on was in the 93 or 95% last year. Another council member who works full-time was at 100. I think 2 of them might have been. I don't have the stats in front of me. So, you know, that's the case. But just keep that in mind, that there can be a lot of different variables there. Okay, just checking the chat there to make sure there wasn't more. So yeah, the hours are long. It's not just Tuesday. Every week, as an elected person on council, you'll have 300 to 1,200 pages of meeting materials to read. And again, not just for the Tuesday meeting, but for other things. Sometimes you'll get no calls from constituent staff or other elected folks, and sometimes calls will take up your entire day without you having planned for that. That's a piece to realize. Also, there's no work phone or voicemail for councillors. We don't have an office. We do have some access to County of Brant office space, but you won't have an office. You won't have your own councillor phone or etc. So you may want, some councillors do this. Some councillors have a second number, a second line with its own voicemail or answering machine, because, you know, if you live in a house and you have, most people have cells, but if you don't, you know, you don't want your teenager on the phone and nobody can reach you, that sort of thing. So keep that in mind as well, and that'd be at your own cost. So yeah, do you have a day job? How flexible is it? And again, what about committees? Also conferences, community meetings, boards you might be appointed to, emergencies, advocacy opportunities, meet and greets, information nights, consultations, all of that stuff. That's addition to the long reading, etc. Another piece too to remember, even when you're onboarding, is to take some time off. You do have 2 council members per ward. It's a part-time job in terms of the pay and the allotment and the resources you get, which aren't very much. You don't have a staff, for example, you don't have an assistant, nothing like that, nothing like you see on television. But you can coordinate coverage because of the ward mate system, right? So when I'm out of town, I coordinate that with Steve and vice versa, which is very helpful. And sometimes it's just a day. Hey, I can't take calls today. You know, my kid's in the hospital. You know, okay, then we sort of make sure that we tag in and out and that sort of thing. But this job, and it is a job, can take up as much time as you want it to. You know, on the low end, it's 20 to 40 hours a week, but it could take up 100 hours a week if you let it. And you know, just keep that in mind. Just keep that in mind, and that may sound great to you, but that also might not be a good fit with other things you have. One thing too to remember is staff. So staff are not your staff; they're the staff of the County of Brant. But the staff are very helpful to council members generally around information and information sharing, and they're very, very, very helpful, generally speaking, to new council members. So get to know them. Ask questions. You know, if you're not even sure who to ask a supervisor or the CAO or another counselor to get the information. The first year, a lot of things are going to take up more of your time than they will the second, third, or fourth year. Questions that I was asked in my first 2 months of being elected, you know, it might take me 3 hours or 6 hours to figure out the answer, but then I have that answer, and I also have that knowledge about how to get those answers a little better. So the next time it might take 3 hours, and then the next time you might take 1, and then it might take no time at all because you kind of know it by heart, right? Or you know who to call specifically or who to email. So that's one of those things where as you go, that part does get better, but specifically in the first 3 months and really the first year, things take a lot longer to piece out and figure out than they will over time. Okay. But yeah, staff are very helpful, but again, you're in no way able to direct staff, right? Council can direct staff broadly through vote of all members of council. So council, after a vote, the mayor in an emergency situation, or the mayor's designate in an emergency, and we have had a long period of time where there was an emergency piece. But council really, the only staff member that we can direct through a vote of all members of council is the CAO, who then can direct staff to do X, Y, and Z. So you're never going to be chatting with somebody at planning, let's say, and then say, well, I don't think you should do that. That's against the rules. You can't do that, right? You never talk to somebody. You call somebody at say community services and say, oh, there's litter at the park and it's pretty bad. You know, I'm hoping somebody can get it, and they'll say, oh yeah, absolutely, we'll get it within 6 hours or whatever it might be. But you're not able to get on the phone and say, listen, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You're not a supervisor, you're not a boss, you're not HR. You are a member of council who has a vote in one body and a decision-making power. Michael Bradley, I believe, said, that we provide a direction, but staff actually row the boat, right? If you keep it in that sort of mindset or that metaphor. Okay. You are responsible, however, and sometimes personally responsible for good management of the municipality and its resources, including and especially when it comes to water quality. There's a lot of training on this. It's time-consuming training, but you are personally responsible as a member of council for making sure that we don't have a Walkerton type situation, and personally liable. So please keep that in mind as well. The first year is a whirlwind, and it's just after a busy time that is an election. There's so much training. You have your first budget, which is a very time-consuming and meticulous process. There are meeting rules. It's not like most meetings you've ever been to. There's rules about points of information, points of order, when you speak, when you don't speak, and how you even address people, including members of the community who might come to present. That's not a lot of back and forth. It's often a question through a speaker, things like that. One thing I really recommend is be a little gentle with yourself. You are going to mess it up from time to time without realizing it. Even, you're 3.5 in, sometimes you make blunders and mistakes. Also, to find a more experienced mentor, I think is really, really valuable. It could be a council member who's not new, somebody who has more of a tenure on council. If you're lucky enough to have a ward mate that has more experience, maybe they can give you some guidance and tips. Myself and my ward mate, we were elected new together, so we didn't really have that. But members of council who were more veteran were very, very helpful, especially when we were more in person and there could be a little bit of that chat, sort of more casual chat before and after meetings. But you can also find somebody like a retired former council member or council members from other communities. And there's a lot of networking that can happen in that way that's more casual, to pick the brain of other folks about projects, about emotions, also about how to find something or some information. Okay. So I hope that's helpful. And then the third piece here I wanted to talk about with my time allotment. And I want to thank the clerks for asking me to do this. And there was a member of council who had sort of suggested, because I'm in the unique position of not officially declaring and formally now declaring I'm not running, that I can actually speak at this without a conflict of interest. So I just want to thank everybody for that invite. But the third piece is sort of the best practice now that I have had some practice. And again, this is just my opinion. Hopefully it provides a little color before you're run and before you're elected. But the one thing I want to start with is that we are a very unique community. And I don't mean that in terms of like a slogan, what a unique community. I mean, we are truly, truly a unique community. We're one of the smallest, if not the smallest single tier municipality in Ontario in terms of our population. We're an odd shape, which makes us very unique. We're a donut. I don't know of any other municipality that's the shape of a donut with a large urban center in the middle that has a different tier of government. And then also, which has practical issues like we don't have a center point that, you could travel 40 minutes in the same county and have to dip out of it then into it. If we were to have our council meetings in the center of our community, like most do, that would be, the Highway 403 or like the Linden Park Mall in Brantford, and that's not even in our community. So that's a big piece. Sometimes this will happen, and every member of our council has this experience. People don't know the difference between the city of Brantford and the county of Brant. You will get calls about something in Ward 2, let's say, and after 30 minutes on the phone with the person, you realize they mean Ward 2 Brantford, because they just typed in Ward 2 Brant or whatever it was. Once myself and my ward mate somebody from Brantford, we didn't know it at the time, demanded we go almost be vigilantes at this drug house in Ward 2. And we're going, where is this? Oh my goodness. And sometimes the streets have the same name in the city and the county and the wards. And it turns out it was a Ward 2 Brantford issue, not a Ward 2 Brant Paris issue. So again, it's a funny story in the context of this conversation, but very frustrating for the person who called, who spent half an hour advocating for swift action on this issue they really cared about. We're surrounded. That's the other piece, and not to raise the alarms, but we share a boundary line with nearly a dozen other municipalities or Indigenous reserves, and with multiple systems of government, including ones that are two-tier, like the Waterloo region. So that's good news. There's lots of potential partners to work on things, and we do have formalized partnerships and committees with all of them in some way, shape, or form. But also it's sometimes resources, competition for resources, funding, jobs. We also have multiple joint services with other municipalities, and their rules of meeting may be different than ours. So that can create another steep learning curve. So more rules to learn. We also have 3 MPPs and 3 MPs, and again, most people don't know that. And Brantford Brant is the largest federal riding in terms of population in the entire country. So that's a pretty busy group of MPs and MPPs. And again, with 3 of them, that's just an interesting dynamic, right? Like sometimes you might say, I'm going to go advocate to the MP or the MPP about this, and it could be the wrong one if you're not clear about where the boundaries are. Okay. So much like that, the person who calls from Brantford asking us to do something, we might be calling upon the wrong MPP or MP if we're not careful. We're one community, we really are, but we also have a history of being a community of communities that had their own systems of government and their own town councils and their own boundaries and their own issues and their own historical positives and negatives. We're very broad, so this is again on that piece about being unique. We have the same amount of kilometers of road as the city of Brantford, but only 1/3 the population and tax base to support that. So that has a huge effect on things like snow clearing, road maintenance, water systems. We have like 5 instead of 1, and we can't have a central one because we don't have a center. And even things like where we meet, as I talked about earlier, and equity for those things, right? If you're a Ward 5 councillor, it's a lot more travel to get to Paris for a meeting than if you're a Ward 1, 2, or 3 councillor, right? On top of that too, there's been some changes since the pandemic. Hoteling, in terms of staff hoteling, is more likely. So, you may be connecting with people more via Zoom and yes, in person as well, but Zoom and phone and emails. And those things are here to stay, right? I see things like we are meeting mostly in person, but if an MP or an MPP wants to meet with members of council to consult about something like the expansion of the Greenbelt, we had a meeting like that where myself and the mayor attended, and we were at Zoom, and I would see something like that actually remaining as a Zoom meeting in the future because of where people are geographically, right? So there's that piece. I think that's here to stay. I would suggest investing in a decent home setup for meeting online. Because constituents want to do it as well. And yes, in person, and yep, you're going to go to people's lawns. And by the way, people are going to show up at your house sometimes, unannounced and uninvited. And that can be interesting or scary or benign, but you have to figure out how to sort of handle that. But I think things like meeting with constituents, participating in meetings and consultations will remain online. Nobody wants to look up your nose on Zoom, right, or have a hard time hearing you. So you may want to upgrade your camera, get a lamp or 2 in your room, a decent microphone, etc. Also, another tip is to ask folks to email you or call you. A lot of times we talked about social media, and this can be a practical thing. People will contact you on your personal social media or on like an Instagram. That's really hard to, especially from a phone, copy and paste to get in touch with the right staff, and you end up asking for their email anyway. And you might be looking for some conversation that happened because you want to now talk to a staff about it, but wait, where was it? So on a practical level, you can have 5 or 6 different social media type accounts as a municipal elected person. But, wait, did that person contact me on this one, or this one? Like, the last thing you want to do is open up a TikTok to talk to a planning staff member about a zoning application, because that's where somebody messaged you. But if people really care, and if you just say, oh, could you please email me at my brant.ca piece, so it's part of the public record, so that I can more easily connect you with staff. 90% of the time people get that. And then they have your email more readily available for the next time. And they're not Instagramming you privately and things like that. And then the last piece I want to talk about, maybe this is just as somebody who was a social worker for a really long time, is how to take care of yourself while doing this. Yes, engage online, but realize it's a small part of the job. Realize that sometimes people just want to vent to the public and not actually engage on an issue. People have the right to complain, and sometimes people just want to complain without their counselor correcting them or fact checking them or even engaging, right? Sometimes you're not welcome in those spaces, and it's more about just listening and monitoring. Yes, participate, but if it's taking up too much of your time or it isn't having a positive result in the community, then maybe it isn't a good priority at all times. And you may miss other things if you're engaging so much online And sometimes it's literally the same 20 people who have a particular mindset or complaint repeated over and over again. And that's actually a small portion of the population. I remember there was a person who was complaining for like 2 years about a particular issue, and they didn't, they weren't even in the ward that I'm representing. Right. And I wasn't their counselor. And, it was actually more helpful for them to go speak to their counselor who had a better idea of that issue and could help resolve what was there. But also that sometimes the resolution isn't possible, right? The community also doesn't agree on anything fully. Like there's no 100% consensus, right? And this isn't a role about appeasement. It's about the public good. It's about good governance. It's about being thoughtful about how you vote and being able to explain why you might have voted differently than somebody may have wanted, but also some people will be very happy with that. And sometimes some of the biggest community conflicts involve 2 or more options which all have positives to them, right? Like we're never voting on, a really, really, really bad option that's going to make life hell for everybody and a wonderful heavenly option that's going to make everything great. No, it's like, do we want option A, B, or C? They all have positive points, they all have negative points. And sometimes people have a lot of community conflict about, yeah, that one's good, but this one's better, and we have to have a little bit of perspective about that, right? And people won't like you. Do not run for office because you like praise, or even because you like thoughtful critique. And you will get some of that, you definitely will. But you'll also get a lot of less considered opinions and even personal attacks, professional attacks. At all levels of government right now, the public discussion can be very divisive, and it seems to be trending more that way. So thick skin is required. And also you'll have people who, hate something that was done, a change that was made, and then 5 months later actually say, you know what, I was wrong. I prefer this way. So sometimes it's not about that knee-jerk reaction to a knee-jerk reaction. We can always have another vote. We can always change things or change things back, but just something to keep in mind. I hope that's helpful. You want to also carve out that time for off time to unplug, and again, coordinate that with your fellow staff members. Have non-council related interests and hobbies. Connect with people locally, not as an elected official. Have some people within your ward and your community that are not going to want to talk to you about politics, and that's okay, because you're still going to need friends. You're still going to need social time that doesn't get eaten up by talking about the marginal tax rate, and things like that. And also things too, if it's your anniversary, you may want to do it out of town, because, or if you're taking your mom out to brunch, you may want to do it in Cambridge, because if not, you might get your mom's brunch hijacked by somebody talking about speed hump for 30 minutes, and without really gauging that it's a personal time, because it's not, because you're out in the public, in the community you represent, right? Also too, with that piece about critique, etc. Again, remember, people, like, that's also part of it. Like that is a sign of some health within your community, that there are people who are willing to speak passionately and publicly about things. I just know this. I know that when I was 15, maybe 3 people hated my guts, and when I was 20, maybe it was 6. And when I was 28 and I said I was going to run for federal office, it suddenly was 100. And when I ran in an election, it was suddenly 150, 200, maybe 300. And then when I ran again, it was 700. And, there might be 700 people that hate my guts in the community, but there are also, several thousands that have voted for me in the last several years. So you have to keep that in mind as well, and not to have some perspective about that some people hate politicians, they hate elected people, some people hate lawyers, some people hate social workers, some people hate doctors. They shouldn't. You shouldn't hate anybody because of a thing that they do as a profession, but some people are very set in their ways, including sometimes friends and family of yours, right? When you run and when you're elected, your Thanksgiving dinners changed in tone and tenor when somebody who's sort of kind of engaged in politics wants to talk to you about it for the whole time. So, but all that said, it's also great. I have no regrets about running. I'm not running again, just family and life issues in the way, but in 25 years of student, federal, and municipal politics. But it's great. You're in the arena getting to push for ideas and programs you actually care about. You get to make decisions, you get to learn so much, meet interesting people that you'll serve with, and also that you'll see from other areas, people, wonderful staff. And you do get positive feedback about decisions. And I don't mean like, hey, good boy. I mean, this program helped me this program helped my kids, that sort of thing. During this term, for example, I've been really proud of the work we've done on public transit and social services, public housing, working with community partners in different communities, different municipalities, community gardens, recreation, traffic calming, community safety and well-being. And that's, not even the term done yet. And that's just a list off the top of my head that I wrote down 5 minutes before I logged onto the Zoom. And there will be different things that you will champion and you'll actually see results from. But that said, remember, there are things that you may think are municipal in nature that actually aren't. So please keep that in mind. And feel free, if you have questions about what those might be, if you have second thoughts, third thoughts, or first thoughts, and you want to reach out, my email and my phone number are on the County of Brant website. So you can find me there, and I'd be happy to chat with anybody on the call tonight. So I hope that was a little helpful. Sorry if I went a little, I think I hit my time, but thanks so much, everybody.
All right, thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to everybody who took the time tonight to come. Thank you to Nancy and to Briar, who presented on behalf of the county, just explaining the experience that you guys can expect. Thank you to Caitlin and Carol, who presented on behalf of the ministry. And I just wanted to remind everybody that there was a lot of information that came out tonight. So if you realize that there was a question that you wish you had have asked, or if something occurs to you, please feel free to reach out. I know that Caitlin provided the email for the ministry rep. Again, clerks@brant.ca, and you will get in touch with either myself or Briar or Nancy. We all have access to that account. We will help everybody out to the best of our ability. Just a few things that I wanted to note for everybody. So all of the forms that they were talking about today that Nancy and Briar were speaking about at the beginning, required nomination forms, those are now available on the county website. So brant.ca/elections, where you all went to register for this webinar, now contains the mandatory forms, which we're requesting that you have completed minus the signature and the declaration part at the bottom. So you can all go take a look. They're divided out by which race you might be interested in running for. You can go ahead and download those off of the website, print them off. You can attend either the Paris office at 66 Grand River North or the Burford office, or also the Wincy Mills office in Paris in order to pick up the forms. We do have forms physically there, or also if you wanted to reach out to clerks@brant.ca and ask for forms, we would be happy to email those out if that works for you guys as well. Just a reminder that nominations open on Wednesday. We are asking that people have an appointment just to ensure that nobody's waiting for a long time. So if you do go to the website, you do get the forms, you know that you want to file your forms on Monday, please email again clerks@brant.ca and request an appointment. That will get either Briar, Nancy, or myself, and we will get back to you just in terms of scheduling that. Again, I wanted to thank everybody for making this first virtual candidate information night a success. I feel like this went really well. And good night, everybody. Thank you for attending. Thank you for showing interest. And we all look forward to seeing you file your nomination forms, and hopefully maybe we'll see some of you in council chambers come November. So thanks very much and have a great night, everyone.